Continuing coverage now of a state Supreme Court ruling that could have major implications for cases involving educators accused of abusing students. Cases of sexual abuse involving New Hanover County teachers dating back decades can now move forward. WECT's Connor Smith joins us now with more details on the ruling's impact. Connor, you spoke with a Wilmington attorney representing a group of victims. Why is this significant to them?
Well, Fran, this is a big win for them. And while former New Hanover County teacher Peter Frank is already serving a sentence of at least 50 years for his sex crimes, this decision means civil action against him and the county school board can move forward. For Wilmington attorney Joel Rhine and the sexual abuse victims he's representing, justice is now one step closer.
It's fabulous news.
The North Carolina Supreme Court ruling last week that the Safe Child Act is constitutional. The act allows child sex abuse victims to bring civil action until they're 28 years old. It also means they can sue both the abuser and the institution that might have enabled them.
It just shows, nobody can stand for this. Nobody can stand for it. We've got to do better.
This means the case against Peter Frank can now start back up again. The former Roland Grice Middle School band teacher already in prison for at least 50 years for a series of sex crimes. Without the Supreme Court's ruling, the civil case would have gone away because of the old statute of limitations. Separate litigation for similar allegations against another former New Hanover County teacher, Michael Kelly, are also in the works. Ryan and his team now back to work, keeping a highlight on the wrongdoing.
Over and over again, how does that happen? Well, I'll be damned if I'm going to sit by and let that go.
Ryan says the challenge against the act has been costly, hurting victims.
These are brave, brave people, and I admire them. We want to get them the help that they need, and the only way we can get the help they need is pursue these actions.
We also reached out to the North Carolina Attorney General, Jeff Jackson. He sent us this following statement. It reads in part, quote, "By upholding the Safe Child Act's look-back window, the North Carolina Supreme Court acknowledged what we know to be true. It can take years for people to process the trauma of childhood abuse, and victims should have the opportunity to hold their abusers accountable in court." And Fran, Ryan says this decision doesn't have much of an impact on the case against Michael Kelly. You might remember the New Hanover County School Board settled with accusers last year for nearly $6 million.
Connor, there's all the pieces to the Safe Child Act beyond just expanding the statute of limitations. What else does it include?
Well, Fran, there's also new mandatory reporting and training requirements. It also protects children online from communicating with sex predators.
All right, Connor, thanks so much.